All right, we are back at the Carrick's conference, and with us is Philip Martin and Paul Hammonds, and we're going to be talking about modern evangelism, in particular using digital media, how to use digital media in evangelism. And you may know more about this than you think you do. Most of the things that we do is interacting in some way with digital media today, or many of the things that we do. But these guys are experts in that. They are here today to share their expertise with us. And I'll just kind of turn the conversation over to them. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to send those in, and I'll kind of interject those into the conversation where they're appropriate. So we want this to be interactive. We want to help you. We want you to get benefit out of this, and they are here to help us find answers to the questions that we have. So with that brief introduction, I'll kind of turn it over to you guys. If you want to introduce yourselves again, Philip, why don't you go first this time? And we'll take turns. You just kind of introduce yourself, and then Paul will introduce himself, and we'll dive into the discussion.
So my name's Philip Martin. I like tacos, like canoes. I certainly enjoy talking about Jesus and the gospel. And I am primarily these days more of a content producer than a consumer. But I have spent a lot of years fooling around with digital technology. And way back in the early days of the internet, I styled myself as some sort of a hacker, but that's just not really a thing. And now the only thing I hack on is tacos. Yeah, that's good enough. I don't know about an expert either.
I think it's very appropriate that Philip did manage to get in tacos not once but twice in his intro. That's very relevant, I think.
We have a feud. He hasn't had a real klobasnik yet. Once he does, he'll have to get a tin sign that says klobasnik in his house. It's a little more cumbersome.
Let's just say I make regular journeys to the heartland of Texas, where there's plenty of opportunity there. Brisket is good. Kibasniks are good. Tacos are grand. I like food.
It's all good.
It is all good.
As a Texan, I can say brisket tacos. There you go.
They're excellent. They're excellent.
My name is Paul Hammonds. I've been an evangelist for the last year. I have actually done a lot of work in marketing for the last several years in secular jobs. Before that, I actually became a preacher, kind of alluding to what Phil just said, because I apparently couldn't shut up talking about the gospel, talking about the Bible. It was something I felt called to do this last year and a half. It's been a great decision for me, and so I've now been trying to find ways to incorporate a lot of the digital marketing stuff that I've been working in my past life into what we do here as evangelists in the Lord's church. I've done. I'm not a sophisticated website builder, but I've used WordPress, made several websites, and had managed a couple, and have some insight in that area in terms of some of the best practices and things in terms of what makes a good website, and in terms of search engine optimization and sharing out through social media and a lot of things like that. So basic digital strategy. So been trying to work on how to help people to understand those concepts a little more in a role in which we are more and more becoming marketers and not just preachers. I was talking to somebody the other day. I was talking about what it means to be a preacher and what that job entails. And all you got to do is put together a class and 2 sermons. People have been doing that every year for the last 100 years or so. Now we've added a whole lot of other jobs onto that layer. It's incumbent on us to at least understand that they're there and at least try to be good at them if we can, or if nothing else, at least try not to let them to be an interference with the work we're doing. So that's what I'm here to help about.
Sure. I guess, Paul, we can kind of break things down again and just talk about what we mean by digital media. That's a really ginormous basket. 10 years ago, if you talk about digital content, you're mainly talking about a limited aspect of the internet, and the market space was kind of split into 2 areas. Half of it was illicit pornography, The other half of it was the variety of streamed content. The scales have certainly shifted, where illicit content has diminished as the primary driver of consumer digital content. But it's still an issue there. That's something I think we might want to grapple with in some way as well. But that's like dollar value content and download value content. It's just one of those practical realities of the dangers of any kind of worldly sphere. And we're trying to share the gospel into that mess.
Well, and I think one of the things that the challenge, maybe the biggest challenge, and alluding to what you just said, is that anybody can be a blogger now. Anybody can be a podcaster. Anybody can be a news outlet of some form or fashion or other. And there's a freedom of that, but there's also the reality that even if it's good content, which a lot of times it isn't, there is a delusion to the point where we have gotten to what a lot of the industry calls content shock, where we have so much that we can consume in a given day that we can't consume anymore. And in fact, there's a tendency for a lot of people, and myself included, sometimes to just pull back when we've got so many things that we can listen to, so many options, whether it be blogs, podcasts, videos, any of those different things, that we just don't do any of it. And so it's one of those things where our challenge, if we're going to be preaching or teaching or doing anything online, is that we have to understand the medium, I should say, that we're using, and figure out how to cut through the clutter and gain credibility with our potential audience. And as much as anything, just get people to see us in a sea of information and options that can be at times pretty overwhelming for anybody.
Right, and to a certain degree, it's probably helpful to kind of break it down in maybe a couple of baskets. Visual media, it'd be one broad basket that we include video and visual content. Literary content can be another one, books, bulletins, articles, literary production, and then pure audio digital content, podcasts, radio programs reformatted in other ways. But in all of them, I think we're trying to accomplish the Blues Traveler trick and get the hook to bring them back. I think that's kind of what we're looking for with a lot of this. Here's an illustration of something that's going to be a continued market shift and the market is ideas here, by the way. When I use market, I'm talking about the ideas or concepts, not so much pure advertising principles. Right now in the United States, nearly every, if not all, major movie theaters are closed. All small market niche movie theaters that try to do theater and dinner, theater and snacks are closed. They have been closing for years. They just got pushed over the edge with this last shift because you can watch a 4K movie at home. Like you can do that at home with surround sound and have 90% of the movie experiences we go for replicated at home, and not be paying a provider $100 in snacks, which is where theaters make their money because they can't really make them on the movies.
And at least in my case, without having the five 14-year-olds 2 rows in front of you talking the whole time.
Right. But that actually increases in the home environment.
Sometimes, yeah, I was going to say for me that works, not for everybody.
Yeah. The dialogue aspect of it. But that's a shift in market sphere in the way in which we process ideas. We bring ideas to our table. And I think there's a couple of things that I think are really super important to kind of work through. You got to have a good understanding of why would congregations step into that zone. And then once you make that yes, well, why is pretty easy. That's where everybody is. But once you make that S, you got to do some good, the S statement, you got to do some good research before you step in there. Here's an illustration. If I'm going to travel as a believer, I'm going to make an intended effort to find other believers to worship with on the first day of the week. I always do that as part of something I do. And one of the tools is to go to the internet and just start looking and saying, are there any religious groups in the area I'm going to be? What do they believe? What do they know? What do they do? And if I go there and I see a website that looks like it was MySpace, with flying GIFs and unnecessary information that's not relevant to the sphere that it's operating in, that tells me more about the group than anything that's on the page. It tells me perhaps they don't have anyone there who has the skill to work that area. Maybe they don't care. Maybe the culture of that community isn't impacted by that. But also, and this has happened to me personally, the information might be so outdated that I can't get a hold of a human to ask them about their assemblies when they meet, to actually meet with them. That's happened to me, I don't know, multiple times over the last 25 years when that's been an option. You go somewhere and you find out that their assembly has moved location or times and nobody updated any of the ways to get a hold of them. I can't verify. And that's just an illustration of the need versus outcome.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where, I think, if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, I think it might be a little bit more of a revelation. So I feel like we're a little bit late to the party in saying this, but ultimately having a website at this point, if you don't have one, there's really very little credibility in terms of people trusting who you are. To your point, we are a generation now, or a society now, that looks up everything, researches everything online before we go anywhere. We're going to check up on things, and if there's a website that says this website is not available, or construction coming in 2005, or whatever it might be, there's the suspicion is that if you're a visitor or somebody like that, that I'm going to get there and it's going to be boarded up and gone, and there's nobody going to be there, or there's going to be 5 people there, or it's going to be a group that for right or wrong is in a vacuum that's still living in the 1940s, and that colors the way people respond to you, and it colors your own credibility in terms of not only just the idea that you're paying attention to the details, but that you're in touch with society on some level. There's that idea that, again, right or wrong or indifferent, we don't need a website, we're just, that's not a thinking that's in line with today's society, to the point where people might start to question whether you're really relevant at all, whether you even understand the society in which you live. And so I think I've heard, at least in the past, I think people have gotten over this now, but in the past, there's pushback about the idea that, well, when you start marketing the Lord's church, you're giving into the secular side, you're bringing in secular ideas into the spiritual realm, and that's just diluting the gospel. I think we kind of all understand that at this point, speaking in a digital realm is basically the currency in which we all live. It's the way that we communicate with each other. It's the way that we seek information, and if we're not there, we're missing out on a lot of opportunities, but we're also creating some barriers for ourselves.
Yeah, I might even go one step further in one area there and say that websites were necessary 10 years ago. 5 years ago, maybe. Today, a social media presence in one of the major platforms is probably more relevant than a really fat website. And actually, most websites are bloated albatrosses because the visitor that gets there cannot find the answers to the questions that you want them to ask. And so there's really only 3 questions of important knowledge base that I want a visitor to know answered for them. In some big sense, what we believe, like in some way or another, in a very synthesized, short form format that they can read and understand quickly. I want them to know that. Secondly, I want them to know when we are going to be meeting together again, like really big, bold, and then I want them to know where, with really big, bold, detailed, simple illustrations. Everything else after that should drive them to those 3 things: what we believe, when we're going to meet, and where we're going to meet. The rest of it, the website might be focused inwardly to the flock. It might be structural for like, okay, who's going to do what, when, where? Here's upcoming events. Here's other stuff. maybe special series will come up and replace those big goals, but almost all content should drive people to a behavior. And the behavior choice might be, hey, I want to talk to this person, because in the end, that's all that we want. We don't want to convert someone purely in the digital sphere, where they go seek out a third party to be immersed. I want to draw them into a flock of God's people so they can be shepherded, so they can be mentored. One of the things that's really powerful in the New Testament is that no matter how you fillet the fish, in the end, every picture of the New Testament is believers together. There's very little impetus on believers apart. It's family of God, people of God, the church et cetera, et cetera. So I think in all of this, digital content, digital media, whether it's video, and I want to talk a lot about making quality content in these areas. I think it's important. But it should drive, it should push, or pull if necessary.
There's a comment from Craig Evans, and he said, kind of going along with what you guys are talking about, he said the website is the front door of the church, and most visit your congregation before, right? They come to your website. Mm-hmm. They're visiting your church at the website, in a sense.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't completely clear if it sounded like he said most do visit your congregation before they visit your website, and I'm not sure I'd agree with that. I suspect that it's true sometimes, but I'm not sure. Maybe I'm.
I guess maybe meant backwards, where your first visit is the website.
Right.
Yeah.
Your first visit is like a Google review, a Facebook page, a Facebook post, a social media post, a YouTube thing, or the website itself. Almost always.
And to Phil's point earlier, I think with religion in general and Christianity, specifically in Church of Christ, even more specific, nobody wants to show up and be uncomfortable somewhere. Nobody wants to get there and be in a situation where they're looking for the door 5 minutes in. They want to have a good experience, and the best way to do that is to figure out what to expect in some way, at least to the extent that you can. So finding out ways, I think to Craig's point, finding out ways that you can set the right expectations for what's going to happen when you meet together. I think that I've heard some preachers make this point. I think they're right, that we take for granted that visitors, particularly visitors who have never been to worship with a Church of Christ or with any group religiously, that they're just going to understand what's going on. And so we never really explain what we do. We just kind of do it, and we just figure people will figure it out. And the website is a great opportunity for us to try to educate people beforehand, to set the expectation that they're welcome, that we want them to ask questions, that it's okay to not understand everything, that if they want to know something, and here's what we're doing here, and this is what this means, and things of that nature, and to know that if I go there, I'm not going to be, I can feel comfortable. I'm not going to be singled out. I'm not going to be embarrassed. I'm not going to be grilled. I'm not going to be given the hard sell. I can just come and find out what's going on. And the more comfortable you can get people before they come, I think the better chance that person's going to come, have a good experience, and come back, which is obviously what we want to do.
Something I've done over the years, and I try to do with first-time visitors that are friends of mine or acquaintances that have never been to our particular assembly before, even if they are already believers or not, is ask them about their experiences. Have a conversation that is direct and say, hey, was this uncomfortable for you? Did we say something that you didn't understand? Did you get lost in the building? Some buildings are huge. When you got there with your kids, did someone greet you and explain to you this Bible class that's maybe different than you're normally accustomed to? Were you okay and comfortable with your kids being taken by a stranger to a Bible study, and you're not going to be in that space with them? All of those things can be addressed in the digital context ahead of time in really simple ways. And I'll make this quick shift. You do not have to be amazing with video technology, content, lighting, etc., to create an engaging opportunity to explain that. You can do it in any number of ways, from as simple as just videoing an actual class taking place with the actual teacher teaching your actual kids in that space, and then cropping it down to a segment that explains this is what a Bible class looks like, and boom, that's the content delivery. This is one of our great Bible classes at the Kimberly Church of Christ. We'd love to have you be part of it. Boom, it's like 15 seconds. It explains more in the visual than it would in the context of everything else. But again, those making plans that meet the SMART goal system, specific, measurable, achievable, repeatable, trackable goals. That I can do this and accomplish some level of desired output is really important to kind of make use of the space, just like you do with anything else.
Well, and I think as you talk about measurables and you talk about metrics, obviously as a marketer, measure, stats, measurables, analytics become such a huge deal. And it is one of those things where we got to think about how we want to measure our success, or how we want to compile that data and figure out what that means. And typically our fallback on, are we doing a success work, is how many people have we baptized this year? And I hope that we understand that that's not a good measurable for what we're doing. And whether it's, our measurable is, are we talking to people about the gospel, and are we getting people in? But even then, we have to always ask the question, well, are we putting ourselves in the position to do those things? Are we trying different things, and what's working and what's not? And more to the point of is always remembering something that you brought up in the last thing, is the idea of a long game strategy. The idea that if we're advertising and we didn't get anything this year, that doesn't mean it's not doing what it needs to do. If you're building I hate to say building a brand, but that's kind of what you're doing. Building a reputation in the community, that does take time. And a lot of times it's just being there and becoming, if you will, almost part of the scenery, almost part of the community, to the point where people know who you are. You may never get anybody come to your website to check you out until you're such a normal part of the community, in their eyes at least, that they kind of, at some point, they just kind of, something comes up and, hey, I want to ask somebody that knows about God about this. And the Eastside Church or the Kimberly Church, just to be, hey, I've seen their sign. They look like they know what they're doing. Maybe I'll ask them. Right. Just finding ways to get share of mind, which is pretty much what marketing is all about. And share of mind simply means that, if you're thinking about a topic that intersects with what we do, I know that I've got a place in your memory there somewhere where I'm going to at least come into your mind when you're trying to decide what is my next step to resolve this issue. And so there is a lot of patience that goes in it, a lot of understanding that the results that I'm getting may not be this year, they may be down the road somewhere. But having, figuring out what you want to do, and having faith and trusting God as well, putting things out there and putting tools in place that He can use for the growth of the Lord's church.
All right. So here's some things that I've kind of categorized in my head to developing a plan. Like, what are we going to do with this? You've got to first assess, what's my talent pool? Like, what is the teaching? Because really when we're talking about digital media, we're talking about teaching at this point. You're really not building relationships per se, but you might eventually do that. But you want to engage and teach. So who I have to use as the talent, if you will, for the interaction, whether the talent writes, whether the talent educates, whether the talent informs. And you say, well, this is what we have. These are the people that we have that are part of the flock at the local church. These are the centerpieces of our relationship. How do I then take whom they are and their reputations and make, in a comfortable way for them, show that to a larger audience? Because you could be asking this basic question: if I wasn't preaching for the church that I'm at, would I be part of the church that I'm at? And if so, why? Well, it would be the people, the relationships, the connections that you share with one another, the commitment to God, the commitment to Jehovah, commitment to Jesus, all these shared things. And you'd want to emphasize that in that area. So you develop a strategy that takes those things. You'd also really have to have taken some time to figure out who you are. Last week, Terry and you all talked about branding, and there's a couple of key takeaways there. If you don't know who you are, you don't know what that answer is going to be.
Mhm.
You don't know what you want to put up as this is who we're trying to follow, and this is where we're at. And if you become part of it, this is who you'll be. And so I think, at least in sense of having that backdrop of here's our big picture, then lets you pick and choose with precision where you go. Yes, you want to scatter the seed everywhere, but your skills may not translate into that area. And it just may be that you need to be in a different box.
Mhm. Well, and that goes back to being honest with who you are as well, and having goals that are maintainable and reasonable. And for example, everybody wants to be, I don't know if everybody wants to be, you know, the ideal, obviously, you'd love to be in Embry Hills or somebody like that's got a huge membership. You got a whole bunch of elders, you got families, you're young, or at least on the surface, at least you're young and thriving, and there's energy, and we want to be that. So how do we get that? Well, the mistake some people will try to make is that they will try to market themselves as such before they actually are. If that's not who you are, don't try to depict yourself as that. You got to find other ways to, you know, if you're a group that's mostly older members that doesn't have families, that doesn't have those bonuses, well, those attributes, you know, and we'd like to have younger people and younger families come in. You're going to have to find a way to convince them that they are valuable here in the work that you're doing, and convince them of a vision that you have. But you can't sell them as the idea of this is what we are, because it won't take long for people to figure out that this is, you know, these people are really not who they say they are. And I don't know that they're ever going to be, because if they think that this is what they are and they're not, then they don't really understand what what they're talking about at this point, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, and that's all part of the next step of the plan, you know. And once you pick your places, like where can we attack, where can we go, where can we work, where can we labor, then you have something to actually place out there into this public sphere. And we'll just talk maybe about visual media for a while, just because I think there's probably a couple of things that are really important there. Then we'll move into the other ones. And Paul, if you want to go a different route, you just say, hey, well, I want to talk about this, and we'll talk about that.
No, that's all right. No, it's going good so far.
So with visual media, I think a lot of times people look at it and go, well, I can't do that because I'm not a tech person. I'll just tell you that if you have a modern smartphone, you have a literal production design team sitting in your hand, because all you basically need to do is find a safe place for that thing to sit up on and press go, and you can record whatever you're doing. And it will do an excellent job of light balancing and getting it all right. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you notice that your room is a little dark, throw some light bulbs or open the curtains. I mean, here's a reality with all of that. What people actually care about versus what I care about are two different things with visual media. I have much higher expectations of resolution quality and graphics, and I want everything crisp and specific, and I've got my own vision. But people actually want good content that they can understand. Yeah. And by understand, I mean they hear the audio really well. And so I think that we kind of don't pay attention to that, because maybe if you're like me, you're like, oh, that's so awesome, and it's pretty, and the colors are right, and I see all the stuff that I see. They just want to hear and learn and be educated and be informed. And a lot of that happens just fine on an iPhone, Android, a Galaxy, whatever, or a webcam. They do it just fine. I tend to just recognize that maybe my personal preferences are a little askew from the average audience. And so if you get that right, everything else kind of goes down the pipe a little better.
I think a lot of it really is about avoiding distractions as much as anything. By distractions from an audio standpoint, audio that's so echoey and hollow that it becomes almost harsh to the ear. And, you know, people want to hear something that's, you know, that's relatively easy on their ears. And if they feel like it's, you know, when you've listened to audio that's so strained that you almost feel like you're tensing up because of it. You want to be relaxed when you're listening to something. That's something that's going to get turned off. Visually, if you're looking at, I've started to call them hostage videos, where the guy's kind of, you know, the angle is odd and it's grainy, and he's like, if you're like the Joker from The Dark Knight and you've got the camera right up here and you've got your forehead and you know, it's seen some preachers do that. There's ways that you can be smart about presenting yourself that to your point, aren't really about flashy materials or flashy equipment. They're just about common sense and awareness of how you are presenting yourself and how you look when you're online. Am I coming across as a crazy person? I've seen, or am I coming across as somebody that's just kind of experimenting and it's not really paying attention to what they're doing? Or am I coming across as somebody who is genuine, who just is trying to get a message across, and at least went through some sort of trouble to try to make it work?
One of the most recent policy statements from Steve Jobs of Apple was in him in his office, and he's using his iPhone in portrait mode, and he walks up and he hits record and he goes and sits down at his desk, and afterwards he walks up and hits stop, and that's literally what they sent out, is the video of him just using his phone. They may have done some post-processing, but the bottom line is he's just doing it.
Yeah,
that's the first thing, is just to step up and do the thing. It's not more complicated than that. You just have to select ahead of time the idea that the content you deliver is the content you want people to respond to. And you can know what your audience is in pretty easy terms. If you're in rural Alabama, then that's your audience, and they're going to have needs that are going to be different than central Atlanta, in the middle of the core of the various counties that surround the Atlanta hub of Georgia. It's going to be different, and you already know those things. I'll add another layer to this when we're thinking about visual media. There are different guidelines you want to put into place for different zones. And by zones, I mean whether you're going to use something like an Instagram layout or a YouTube layout or any of the other social media aggregators, or just have a video series of whatever, and you're going to use it across a bunch of things. The production quality there still has those basic guidelines, but you're going to work within different time constraints. You're going to have different goal sets. And again, you're still trying to drive to an outcome. All content has an outcome. Outcomes might fit into two categories for most digital media, though. A, I want to drive them to that meeting. I want to meet with them face to face. Even if they're already part of the congregation, I want to encourage human participation in spiritual things. But it may also be that the outcome is I want them to know more about what God said. I want them to know more about God's people. I want them to know more about the Word. These are all things that we already do with all of our Bible classes. We're just leveraging it into a new world, a new communication space. And most preachers are already trained to be good communicators. Like, that's what they've already been doing. And the training may have been literal collegiate training. It may have been competitive training. It may have been Toastmasters, which Terry really loves. It may have been their family experiences, training them how to communicate ideas there. You're just moving it into a new thing. Put the camera on, let it roll, take the edited stuff afterwards and place it into its new spot.
Yeah, for the most part, and you can usually find something that's easy enough to use to where you can edit out just really bad mistakes. And I do think sometimes that, we do worry about being perfect, and I do that too. I don't like certain aspects of my videos or my audios, and I'll go back and try to clean some things up because they just annoy me. But the reality is that, to your point earlier, I don't think that people are necessarily looking for somebody who is 100% polished. Occasionally making a mistake is not the end of the world. In fact, sometimes it just means that you're talking genuinely. You're not just reading off of a script. And that, if we've said it before, social media, we talked about this last week, that genuineness and being real is a key to entry for social media. And to some extent with digital marketing too. When people see that you are genuine in what you're trying to accomplish, that goes a lot farther, I think, than having the right lighting or, having a lot of professional equipment and things of that nature.
Yeah, I'll add this. For a long time, the major outreach of this genre were correspondence courses. There's not really a big difference between a paper correspondence course and video studies in some senses. You're just interacting on a different platform. And there are many congregations that are still heavily involved in correspondence course interactions. I think they've really dipped off in the last 5 to 7 years, but they're still going on. We're basically doing the same thing. We're sending out content to educate, to inform, to try to push someone in a particular spiritual direction or pull them towards God, generally or specifically. So with that, when we think about, again, the next layer of visual media, not video, but like actual making print stuff, I'm going to add this little tidbit. You don't have to be an expert in everything. I guess it was about 28 years ago, I made a flyer for a gospel meeting for a congregation that I was visiting at and going to hold the meeting for them. And they didn't have anyone who could do that. And so I said, sure, I'll make the flyer up for you guys. What do you want on there? And they put it all on there. And I sent them the template and then the proof version for them to print for me. They're still using the template. Now, on the one hand, they're a small congregation. I totally get it. They probably don't have anyone who's really interested in making, meeting flyers. But on the other hand, they can pay someone to do that pretty cheaply now in today's market space. If I, go to Fiverr, they'll make you whatever you want them to make. Fiverr's a joke. But go somewhere to get somebody who can do the thing for you, and they'll do the thing for you. There are brethren like Luke Adams, who's tremendously talented, who will make a flyer for you. There are brethren, I won't name them by name because they may or may not want to do the work. They could get overloaded, who I reach out to, who are amazing artists. But Luke does it for a profession, and he's got a business, and he's willing to work with churches. And so these guys do this all the time. If you're doing a big thing, reach out to someone who's better than you, because there's lots of them, whoever you are, that are better than you are at whatever specific thing you might be talking about. And they'll do a great job. Stephen obviously doesn't like Fiverr.
Well, I mentioned that last week, and Luke Adams and Ryan Firm, the artists and visual people came out of they were summoned. They told me
it's
no.
like Beetlejuice. Here's the problem with Fiverr. Fiverr, as a side note, the people who work there will plagiarize ideas and repurpose them and sell them off as their own. That's one of the issues. The other issue is the content they deliver to you, you get what you paid for.
Yeah. And I like what you said about reaching out to brothers or sisters who do this already. Ryan designed the slides for this. I was using just text, and I'm not a visual person. I'm not a visual artist. I just, that's not my thing. And so I asked him to design something, and the people like him are willing to help. If it's their profession, you should pay them for it. They're worthy of their hire. But if you want something that's quality, then find somebody who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And if you've got somebody, and if you got the luxury of doing this, a lot of what I know, for example, about WordPress and some of the other things was self-taught. I just got in and started doing it. And you one of the great things about digital is there's just literally thousands of resources that you can avail yourself on if you're willing to learn. And basically you start off the basic thing and you figure out the basic, and then you say, hey, it'd really be cool if I could do that. And I go, hey, Google, show me how to do that. And Google will show you, and you can add that on, and you can gradually build on that. You don't have to, especially in terms of managing and creating a website, you don't have to be, the days of having to write HTML code are pretty much gone. You can find any number of platforms that will make you a website that you really like, that's optimized for search, that's optimized for mobile. In other words, it doesn't look funny when you look at it on your smartphone. You can create all kinds of different things that probably seem a lot beyond what you feel like you're capable of doing. The only question is, how much time are you willing to put into it, and what are your expectations of it? If all you want is a parking lot for a quick who are we and how do you find us, then you can throw that website together in 30 minutes and you're done, and you never have to worry about it other than making sure that it's still working. If you want something a lot more interactive, obviously you can always build on those things as you go and add features and add pages, and you don't have to if you aspire to be up here at this level at one point, you don't have to start there. Start with something manageable, and then you can build and learn, and through experiences how you're able to do those things.
Right, it doesn't matter the area. We've talked a little bit about some of this visual media stuff. There's some great websites. Canva's really good. I think you guys talked about some of this stuff with the branding discussions. I use Photoshop quite a bit because I like its flexibility. It can do a lot more than Canva can do. I also take a lot of my own pictures and then try to use those and repurpose those into the stuff that I do. But it doesn't have to be perfect. That's the other thing I wanted to include. Like it is with video and content delivery in that context, your visual media doesn't have to be perfect, nor does it have to be branded perfectly all the time. Because you've got to decide what I'm going to do with this. Is it a permanent piece or a throwaway piece? Is it a one-time use, or will I use it for a year? Will it become the permanent image for all that I ever do? Okay, you put a scale of effort into those things. And we move beyond just the visual stuff. We move in, like, say, audio podcasts, which are pretty simple in some ways. But again, it's all about the content. If you don't have anything worth saying, it doesn't matter how pretty it looks. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that we have to accept. Like I've cited last conversation, the Elevate group as one of those illustrations, and I mentioned the work that Rick Warren did with Purpose Driven Church and some of the background of those churches. We can disagree deeply about the quality of their content, but to the audience that listen to it, they believe the content is relevant to them. And they believe that they're being impacted by that content. And I'll tell you, from working with guys who go out to a larger spectrum of belief than the three of us share, a lot of work goes into producing that content that they share. And they try to craft a message that is valuable to their audience. And so I think it's an important thing to think about when you're trying to reach someone, is that your content has to be convicting. Your content has to be challenging. It really has to reach across all of those lines so that someone who has been convicted, who has been challenged, will have the courage to come and visit.
Yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of there's different kinds of marketing. The easiest kind of marketing is trying to market something where a need has already been established. We are in an industry where that need not only has not been established for the most part, but there is adamant opposition to having that need to begin with. Nobody wants to hear that they're lost. Nobody wants to hear that they're in sin. I have no interest in that. We have to find a way in that messaging that everything's got to point back to creating some sense of urgency. And it doesn't, and I'm not talking about the old school hammer the pulpit, you're going to hell if you don't start going to church marketing that we've seen billboard examples here in Alabama apparently of. But the idea of making sure that people understand that there's a lot at risk here, and it's important. This is important enough in your life that you need to spend more than a few minutes on a Sunday thinking about it. Are you considering what the Word of God has to say about your life, about your relationships, about everything that you do, and trying to get people to at least entertain the idea that, hey, maybe if I don't know a lot of stuff, that I need to go find somebody that can help me learn more. Because I think if you talk, my unofficial survey would probably tell you that about 75% or more of the people in this country are satisfied with their level of understanding about the Bible. Probably a lot more than that.
I just want to clarify something. I don't know why Ryan Firm is not part of this discussion in person, and I know he's watching. So Ryan, this is me calling you out a second time. I called you out in person the first time because Paul should get to know Ryan too. That's another benefit of this. We're not going to, Ryan and I aren't going to even be able to go to our, what was going to be our second annual visit to a conference this year for many reasons. But I want to add another thing I think is really important in the whole basket of this. If done with a purpose in mind, this is an open door to take the gospel to people who you don't get to know in any other way. And whether you get 30 seconds to do it, 60 seconds to do it, an hour to do it is irrelevant to me. It's such a privilege to be able to do it. And the more we think about it as a privilege, the more our enthusiasm and our interest will go into trying to do our best with it. Because in many senses, this is the current now. Like, it's not just a new normal, it's just right now, that's how it is. And we need to make sure that we're pushing the seed into that big sphere as best as possible. There's a lot that can go into all of this that is beneficial. Ryan makes another comment I was going to bring in too. He said, be nimble, be purposeful, and be smart. You got to have to be so flexible with this. The market space is going to change. A lot of this stuff will adjust over time. What is working today may not work in 6 months or 2 years, because there'll be some shifts in the way that the audience that we're reaching is willing to participate. I don't know what's going to happen 3 months from now with the way the government is going to respond to the new needs of our culture. Nobody else does either. But we're going to certainly be seeing more digital teaching than it used to be. I think that's pretty much a given at this point. People are kind of accustomed to it. They're kind of liking it in some ways. And so that means we need to get better at it.
By the way, just I'm doing this on my phone. As a result of that, I can't see any comments. So I'm relying on Philip to relay any questions or comments that he feels like I ought to know about.
That's typically Stephen's job, but I just kind of noticed it here. I'm not sure what Stephen's doing. I think he's enjoying being only the button pusher. He's the man in the box.
Well, Stephen's big job for this convention, which we all appreciate that he's done, has been getting people that will talk basically without being prompted, so you don't have to say anything and moderate. So you can basically just sit back, and he's doing a great job of that. No, we're just kidding. But in a way, no.
I'm just trying to bring people on who know what they're talking about, so that I can just watch and learn.
I think one of the things I want to also include is again, with all of this, there's a lot of content that already exists in congregational hands. Material developed by other men over the years, maybe members of a local church, members of other congregations, that's pretty dated. That is old school layout, old school value in the sense of production value. It doesn't mean it's no longer useful. It can be transformed into something great. And here's a simple illustration of that. You can take maybe that great Harkwriter workbook, and Robert wrote some excellent workbooks over the years, and teach that template. Use that as the outline for your class maybe. And now you're taking the content you already have and re-delivering it to an audience in a more modern context. Or I've got some gifted to me sermon outlines from some evangelists in Texas over the years that were some great people. The material itself is not one that I would scan and put out online, but within the kernels of it, there's some sentences and some great Bible instruction in a point here or there that I'll excerpt out and I'll include in future use ideas. And it'll become basically a quotation from someone who's passed away, but now it gets to live again. And I'll tell you, from developing digital content, that's a great way to reuse the stuff you already have. It speeds up the process. Look, we're all time pressed. There's only so much of me that can go around. Each congregation only has a X number of laborers, but now you can kind of leverage what you already have and use it in a new way, and really kind of expand the space that you're going to work in.
Well, if you ever get a database together of a lot of those older preachers' quotes and points and outlines and things, I will heartily endorse that and use it. I think that would be an invaluable resource to be able to do, getting all those things together in one place. I think, to your point, the idea of being able to use content, everybody, we have to have content. Content is what drives digital marketing. And bad content is sometimes worse than no content. And so the pressure then becomes, well, I don't know how to write, but I've got to do something, and so I'm going to put something up on my website or in our emails or whatever it may be. It's not written clearly. It's not grammatically correct. It's, we all you got to do is read social media for 20 minutes. Nobody cares about grammar anymore. And and it's not just about being a grammar Nazi. It's about the reality that when you don't pay attention to grammar, 8 times, five times out of 6, maybe it's no big deal. The 6th time you write something that could be interpreted in 4 or 5 different ways because you weren't precise with the way you wrote something. It does require a level of communication and the ability, that sometimes is beyond some people to be able to do, and that's okay. But it's great to be able to find those resources and say, look, if I can't write, I'll go find somebody who does. This is a preacher or this is a writer or somebody who does really good stuff, and I'd like to repurpose that. Now, don't plagiarize it. Don't do it without his permission. But reprinting articles, reposting, cross-linking. Man, if we talk about building a website, we spend time talking about the importance of cross-linking articles because that's a whole other thing.
I'll probably throw this in there. This is a side point, but it is a point. There is no substitute when it comes to developing your ability to communicate than practice. Mm-hmm. And so I do have a very extensive digital library. I got digital before a lot of other folks do, and it's mildly organized. But in order to become an excellent writer, you just got to write. And so there's got to be a balance there. I love talking to Doy Moyer. He writes 800-word articles weekly, sometimes bi-weekly. And that's a big factor into why his digital communication is effective. Yeah. Because he's done the work for 30 years writing 800-word articles where your time and word constraints force you to communicate well. That's one of the areas that there's a tie-in, that digital media is just media in a new box. Yeah. And communication is communication. And so you have to learn how to communicate precisely. One of the things I did in concert with this decision to jump into video was, before that, I did a ton of research and I started writing concise posts 2 or 3 times a week that were all based on usually 1 Bible verse or 2 Bible verses, which I still do regularly. A concise, maybe 200-word max statement about 1 or 2 verses, and usually 1 visual representation of a text, because I do that for everybody else, but mainly for me, so I can learn how to communicate more effectively.
There's a concept that was going around digital marketing, content marketing 3 or 4 years ago. I suspect it's still in vogue. This is another one of those do as I say, not as I do things, because this is something I need to be doing more, and I just haven't been doing it. But there's a concept called big rock content. And what that means is you get a big chunk of content, whether it be a sermon would be a great example in our field. I'm going to take my sermon, and rather than having to let me back up and say that if you're going to have a digital marketing campaign or presence at all, you have to do what you just said, which is be consistent. You have to have regular content that's out, that's predictable, that's expected, that gets people used to listening to your voice. Well, that's hard to do. Creating 3 or 4 things a week it's a lot of work. But the idea of taking something that is big and repurposing it over and over and over and over again. Sermons are great opportunities for that, because you can take a little piece out of this. You can take a sound clip. You can make an infographic. You can make all kinds of different things out of what you're doing and repost those out throughout the course of an entire month. If you wanted to do a theme for the year for a church, you got 1 sermon. You could realistically once a month have something out of that in a different format, in a different way, that makes it seem fresh, that you're not having to recreate things over and over again from scratch. There's ways that you can do that and make a little go a long way and help you to be a little bit more consistent in putting out material and still have, not just be a constant publishing machine, which none of us really have time to do, except Doy Moyer.
Yeah, well, everyone who writes prolifically wrote prolifically beforehand. They wrote a lot of work that got thrown into the trash can before they made it public. A couple of the things that I think would fit into this box. I talked a little bit about them with social media, but there's more of a broader media context, is developing a strategy for release. And what I mean in that sense is that you don't want to dump everything out on one day. And years ago at the Ellettsville preacher training classes that Johnny Edwards did with his son and grandson, he had a phrase he would repeat: make the most out of your material. And if you don't say it in the right Johnny voice, it's just not the same. But that was one of the statements he said. And what he meant by that was kind of what you're getting at. You write a sermon, you've written an article. You write an article, you write a bulletin article. You write a sermon, okay, it's something else. So you can segment out this stuff across the scape of an entire 3-month or 12-month package and release portions of your sermon as transcript or as audio or as video across the entire brand sphere. And a program like Lumi, Hootsuite, a bunch of other ones do the same stuff too, are designed to help you schedule the release of all these different content pools. And they will let you do video, text, audio to the appropriate feeds and sources and control all of it. And you can see a visual calendar that says, here's all of its release dates. It's really valuable to kind of plot that stuff out so that when you look at the big picture, the plan you made for the year, for the 3 months, you see it all coming to fruition. And if you see a gap somewhere, hey, look, Tuesday, we don't have any content that day. Why do we not have any content that day? We need content that day. We need to teach. We need to educate. We need to inform. Because there's and I think you know this too, Paul, there is a underlying expectation of regular delivery from social media sites and from digital content. They expect it every day, or at least the same day every time. And so this gives you a way to manage that. And so Hootsuite's one option. That's what I'm using this year. That's why I mention it. I've used some other ones before. There are a lot of other good ones, great ones. Pick one. You know.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you can do as well, you mentioned the idea of regularity, and one of the things, you know, we alluded to this, I guess this is as much of a social media question as a digital marketing question, but we alluded to the idea that Facebook is only going to show your post to about 2% of the people they're going to watch, which means the good thing about that is if I can post that exact same thing 4 hours later or 8 hours later, and there's a pretty good chance that there will be very few people that will see it twice, which means that part of your strategy is about repurposing and retweeting or reposting, and maybe even just tweaking the message slightly, but using the same thing with the understanding that most of the people didn't see it the first time. So having that consistent regular content, and again, it's and once you start doing that, if you've got like a Hootsuite or frankly, you know, within the platform, you're going to have analytics that will help you. And I know sometimes that can be a little scary, but there's some pretty simple things to look at that you can figure out and start experimenting with, which is when are people engaging with your content? When are people liking and sharing and commenting and things of that nature? As a caveat, if you're looking at a situation and saying that I had 500 people that looked at my content on average on the hour, and I had 5 shares at 7 p.m. and I had 4 shares at 2 p.m. That is probably not a significant difference. You have to, there's some significance that plays into it. But having said that, more is always better. All things being said, if you got 5 here and you got 3 there, do it when you got 5. If you can show that over a course of time, or better yet, do it at 3 and 5. But 3 and 5 is maybe not a good example. Noon and 5 is probably a better. You want to have some spacing.
Well, and again, there's other factors in like the advertising edge of this and what you're paying for and what you're getting as organic growth versus paid growth and all of that. But again, you're still trying to meet these goals that might be congregationally focused. And so let's say you established a mission statement for that local church, and your mission statement reflects the needs of the church today. Yes, you're going to be subservient to your king. Yes, you're going to be trying to grow the body of Christ. but maybe there are specific areas identified for this year that you want to strengthen or shore up. And so you're going to develop your digital content plan to strengthen that and be a part of the plan. That's where the preacher might come into play, is to being the content producer, the talent per se. And then maybe one of the deacons comes and say, okay, can I have your notes from your sermons the last 3 weeks? I'm going to pull out some bits and pieces of that to produce 10 posts that remind us about your sermons for the month of January. And we're going to share those in June and say, hey, looking back. And at the end of the year, you might do the classic, hey, here are our top 12 posts. These are the things, they might all go out at once, like all in one big thing. These were the things that people got really excited about. And we're still excited about them too. So all that stuff can create a mesh of digital content that still draws or pushes to the desired end, which is helping a believer grow. The seed gets watered, God gives increase. Helping a believer transform themselves, the seed gets watered, God gives the increase, etc. Those are, you still have to have those narrow goals within the big umbrella of all this other planning stuff. We didn't talk about digital technology, which is kind of exciting for once. I wasn't answering questions about the best live stream.
How does Zoom work?
So, the answer is the one you have right in front of you to all those questions.
Well, and I think one of the other things, and I became there's a lot of processes involved in what is now called content marketing. And one of the biggest things about that is creating personas, as we talked about real briefly earlier on, the idea of having a face and an identity for your audience and understanding where they are in the marketing world, you would call it a buyer's journey. Are they just looking around? Do they know what their problem is? Have they identified that? Are they looking to answer? Are they getting questions answered? Are they researching? Are they in the buying cycle, which means I know I need to get something. I'm going to buy something. I've already bought it. Now I need reassurance that what I bought was good. Wherever they are in that cycle. And I think that's very applicable for just about anything, including the evangelistic work that we do. Where am I in my relationship with the gospel? Am I just kind of idly curious? Do I even know what the Bible is? If I got a general concept of God and I kind of want to know more about that? If I created a sense of urgency about my relationship, I know it's not what it needs to be. How can I fix that? How can I maintain? And where that comes in digital marketing is understanding that you have very limited control over who comes across your marketing material. And now you've got some, and I don't know if we'll even have time to talk about that, but the idea though is that you want to have something for all of those people. Whoever comes to your website or who listens to your sermons or podcasts or finds you on social media, it's not always about have you been baptized for the remission of your sins. That is not the only message, because that's not the only person that's going to come across you. There's different people that are going to have different needs, and finding ways and thinking about your content and your message from the standpoint of how can I find a way not only to address this guy over here at the entry level, but how can I do it in such a way as to try to move him into the next phase and cultivate something that will increase him along that stage until eventually he gets to that point where we all want him to be, which is, I know I need the gospel. I know what the Bible says. Help me. I want to go do that.
I will say that as you think through that, especially in digital media, it's important to self-analyze. Like, where am I? Mm-hmm. There's a metric that's in a couple of workspace books, and I'll cite it in the chat later, of humble, hungry, and smart. This triad of personal interaction. We have to have enough humility to be corrected. We have to be humble enough to realize that we're not always correct. But we also have to have enough drive to get to work. We've got to be hungry for success. Mm-hmm. And then in the combination of those two traits, we still need to be people smart enough to not damage other people as we drive to work after making corrections. That triad requires for us to be willing to accept criticism when we fail and do so publicly when we fail. I'll suggest that in your goal of driving someone from the new learner to the active seeker, they've got to see that. And it has to emanate first from the radius of the leadership of the congregation. And if there's shepherds in that local church, they've got to be able to look to those elders and say, that's what I want to be. And in some ways, the only way they're going to figure that out is for the elder to say, come sit by me. And especially if the elder asks you to sit by you and come sit next to me, when they're going to have to do that, when they're going to have to admit they're wrong and say, that was a mistake that we made as a leadership group or as an individual, and here's the new path. That's a powerful opportunity in the digital space too. Because we all participate in those realms. You can think about it this way. You want to see a great leader, someone who encourages his subordinates to challenge them. Challenge me when I'm wrong. Obviously be respectful. Obviously remember I'm the one in charge, but you better challenge me when I'm wrong because I'm asking you to do that. And hold me accountable, especially maybe if I realize that I have a weakness over here in the people smart zone, or if I've got a weakness over here in the drive zone. And if I don't show up to work on time that I set, hey, you were late today. You okay? Everything all right? Is everything doing okay? Because you told me you were going to be here at 8 and it's 8:10. I just want to make sure everything's all right. A subordinate doing that to a person in authority would be a rare thing. But a subordinate, a person in authority asking a subordinate to do that and then praising him when he did is going to make everybody else want to be on that team. Well, there's Ryan dropping the old Pro Church Tools stuff. Brady Shear does great work in that field. He does an excellent job of talking about the mix of video production and digital contact. I think his buzz line is reclaiming the 167, about how to have the message of the gospel be available for 167 extra hours a week. And so he does a good job of kind of presenting and framing all of that information. And his videos and his visuals are way awesome. Like, highly recommend. 5 stars. If you're going to use all that kind of terminology. Paul, for you, is there anything else that you wanted to include in the dialogue today?
I don't know. There's so much. I mean, really, we could talk for another hour about all kinds of different things. I guess the really question is, why? I guess the one thing I would say, if we're going to say this, is because I suspect just about everybody listening is to the point where they have a website of some sort. It may or may not be good, but it's there. And so they're all good. And I think one of the problems that we have is the assumption that if we just build a website, or maybe we just make a really nice website, then we can drop it in the internet and people will come. The idea that having a Facebook page, having a website, having a podcast are in and of themselves going to do the work. And it goes back to what we said at the very beginning. There's literally millions of websites, of blogs, of podcasts, of different things that are out there, and you're one of them. The odds of somebody just finding you at random is infinitesimally small. The reality is that if you do nothing with your website, if you do nothing with your Facebook other than put stuff on it, chances are good that very, very, very few people are ever going to see it. Now, if your website is for your members and that's all you're worried about, then that's not a problem. But if you want a website that has an evangelistic tool, you have to be able to accept the idea that just putting a website up and then leaving it alone will not work. We have to be willing to market it. We have to be willing to optimize it from an SEO standpoint. We need to have rich content, and by rich content, I mean content that is a wide variety of topics that are all interrelated that will help our website to have a clear identity that will allow Google then to tell people, hey, you asked a question about God. This is a website that can help you that can help answer your question. We're going to include that in our search results. It includes the idea of even doing digital marketing, actually doing paid advertising, things of that number, things that the only way that you can build critical mass to where your Facebook, your social media, your website will start growing organically at any pace is to at least get that first amount of people that are there going to it, looking at it, sharing it, doing things like that. That's where that organic growth starts. But I think what happens a lot of times is people will put a website out there and, well, nobody visited us last week because of the website. Well, first of all, did we ask that they came because of the website? Did we do any follow-up? Have we looked at what our website traffic is? Have we figured out where people are going and how people are using it? Have we looked at what we can do to grow that traffic? And do we understand as well that that's just one part of the strategy that we have to get people from casual interest to actually committing the time and the resources to come to our worship and actually come in the doors with us. If you expect something to actually happen as a result of your digital marketing, you're going to have to put more effort into that. And so I think there's the importance of having realistic expectations of what you're doing is pretty vital once you get into it.
Yeah, I'd follow along with that as an encouragement to integrate your plans. A successful evangelistic outreach that we took place up in Cookeville made a combination of efforts. We had a specific speaker on a specific topic. The topic was selected because it resonated with the audience in the area. Gospel preacher coming in and talking about gospel issues in light of Bible matters, but it was all planned for our audience. And so that can be any church anywhere. Like, you pick what's necessary for your local group. But here's what we did to market it. We had a personal video from him talking about what he was going to discuss. The video was 60 seconds, and he laid out his topics for the entire weekend. That video was shared across all major known platforms in the area to a good, reasonable reach. We also included a very specific link that took you to the same destination, in this case, a Facebook page every time. So every place that we sent someone to landed only that Facebook page. We included print advertising. So we put out, little lawn signs in members' homes, adjacent to school zones in legally appropriate areas, across the community. So that across the community, there was a print representation of this. We then also utilized mail services to mail out advertisement about the meeting, postcards, to the homes that were central to where our building was located. So we used the zoning process of the post office. That gospel meeting for that community was literally the most successful evangelistic effort that church had ever engaged in, given the metric of people who came that nobody else knew. We had well over 20 people show up to a weekend meeting that nobody in the congregation had connection with. They came to hear because the subject was relevant to them, and they heard about it. And I checked. I'm like, hey, how did you find out? It was really easy to do. Like, I don't know you. How did you find it? Like, I could tell that in my head. So glad to have you here. How did you find out about the meeting? Facebook, sign in the street, a friend. One of the people here? No. Nobody that goes here. Some drove 20 miles to come hear those lessons. So it can and does work, but you have to integrate and not just think, oh, I can just do Facebook. No, you do all of it, and you do so with plan and purpose, so that your work in the digital sphere has impact in the human sphere, in the human space. And so that's probably my last takeaway, is that don't give up the rest just because this is new and neat. Learn to layer them all together and realize that, hey, it will work. And we didn't spend any more in advertising for that meeting than we had spent in other advertising efforts before. Maybe a little bit more in paid Facebook views of that 60-second advertising video, but absolutely worth it. for a congregation that typically had attendance on Sunday mornings around 70, have 20 visitors for a gospel meeting that were not members of the church, that were not members of any church. How many people would pay to have that every Sunday? Everybody. It's not cheap. It takes effort and planning, and you can't do it with the success rate all the time. And if you just start doing it, you may not get the same results. So those are my last thoughts. Stephen, is there something else you wanted us to cover?
Nope. I'm just following wherever y'all go. I think without getting into too many technical things, you guys covered a wide berth of material. And if people have questions about the technical things, like you mentioned, search engine optimization, ways that you could kind of do that, I would encourage them to maybe send those questions in, and we'll forward them as they come in to you guys, and we can get answers available.
Actually, I think I should point to that guy right down there.
That one.
The one down there. He gets all the SEO questions. I don't want to answer any of those.
and I can provide you a long list of articles that will explain things much better than I can.
Yeah, and I like the takeaways that you guys brought at the end, and I want to highlight maybe one thing that I think you said, Philip, about being humble. We kind of have, the American ideal. I'll do it by myself. I can do all this. And I just can't. I can't do everything by myself. I can't design everything. I can't produce everything. I just can't. And so being willing to reach out to either professionals or other Christians who are willing to help and to let them do that, I think that's important. And I appreciate you guys talking about all that stuff. Did you guys have anything else to say before we sign off for the day?
No, I'm good. I talked a lot as it is, probably too much.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of that was a whole lot of talking for one day for me.
Yes,
coming from a preacher.
Well, it was very encouraging. It was very helpful. I'm grateful that you guys were here. You're both very, very kind and generous with your time, and it is encouraging to hear people who know what they're doing and who are successful at these things in ways that matter, right? In using these tools to bring the gospel to people and with the knowledge and background to make that something that we can all do. Thank you very much for being here. I'm very grateful. And we'll go ahead and leave this here. And we'll pick up next month in June with the next theme. And thanks everybody for being here.
Peace out.